I'm Alexandra Rivera, 32, and last Tuesday I signed a check for $2.5 million that would make every person who ever called me worthless say my name with respect. The brass plaque reading, "The Alexandra Rivera Center for Excellence," now gleams above the entrance where I once cowered in shame, where students who used to spit at my feet now walk through doors bearing my legacy. But the sweetest moment wasn't seeing my name in gold letters. It was watching my former tormentors realize that the girl they voted most likely to fail had just bought their children's future. Before we go deeper, please click the subscribe button and comment down below where you are watching from. Growing up in the small town of Millbrook felt like living under a microscope where every flaw was magnified and every mistake became permanent. I was the girl with thrift store clothes that never quite fit right, the one whose lunch consisted of peanut butter sandwiches, while others enjoyed elaborate meals their parents packed with love notes. My father worked 3 jobs just to keep our lights on, and my mother cleaned houses for families whose children attended the same school where I struggled to find my place. The irony wasn't lost on me that she scrubbed the floors of homes belonging to kids who made my life miserable, but we needed every dollar. Knowbrook High School was a social ecosystem as rigid as any caste system, and I occupied the very bottom rung. The popular kids ruled from their throne of designer clothes and expensive cars, while I navigated the hallways like a ghost, hoping to remain invisible long enough to make it through another day. My backpack was held together with duct tape. My shoes had holes that I covered with permanent marker, and my hair was cut by my mother using kitchen scissors because we couldn't afford a salon. Every detail of my appearance screamed poverty, and my classmates made sure I never forgot it. Jessica Morrison was the queen bee, a blonde goddess with a trust fund and a cruelty that knew no bounds. She had perfected the art of destruction through whispered comments and calculated exclusion. Her followers, Madison Chen and Brittany Walsh, amplified every cruel word until it echoed through the entire school. They called me Salvation Army Princess because of my second-hand clothes, and Scholarship Girl, as if my academic achievements were somehow shameful. The names hurt, but what devastated me more was how other students would laugh along, desperate to avoid becoming targets themselves. The worst incident happened during my junior year in the cafeteria, a moment that still makes my stomach clench with remembered humiliation. I had been saving my lunch money for weeks to buy a used graphing calculator I needed for advanced math class. That Tuesday, I finally had enough and decided to celebrate with a hot lunch instead of my usual peanut butter sandwich. I stood in line, counting and recounting my crumpled bills when Jessica appeared behind me with her entourage. "Oh, look! The poor girl is splurging today," she announced loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "Did you find some change under the couch cushions at home?" The laughter that followed felt like knives. But Jessica wasn't finished. As I reached for my tray, she bumped into me deliberately, sending my lunch crashing to the floor. "Oops," she said with fake concern. "Looks like you'll be eating off the floor like the dog you are." The entire cafeteria erupted in laughter and applause. Students pulled out their phones to record my humiliation, and I knew by evening the video would be circulating on every social media platform. I stood there, surrounded by scattered food and broken pieces of the cheap plate, feeling smaller than I ever had before. The lunch lady, Mrs. Patterson, tried to help by offering me another tray for free, but the damage was done. I ran from the cafeteria, tears streaming down my face, while Jessica's laughter followed me down the hall. That night, I made a promise to myself that would change everything. I sat in my tiny bedroom, looking at my reflection in the cracked mirror above my dresser, and swore that someday they would all know my name for reasons that had nothing to do with their cruelty. I didn't know how or when, but I knew with absolute certainty that I would rise above their small-minded hate and build something magnificent from the ashes of their ridicule. My grades became my fortress. While other students were attending parties and football games, I was in the library until closing time, then continuing my studies at home by the light of a desk lamp I'd bought at a garage sale. Mathematics came naturally to me, but I pushed myself in every subject, determined to create opportunities that would take me far from Millbrook. My teachers began to notice my dedication, particularly Mr. Harrison, who taught advanced computer science. Mr. Harrison was different from the other teachers. He didn't pity me or treat me like a charity case. Instead, he recognized my potential and challenged me to reach higher. When he introduced our class to basic programming, I discovered a world where logic trumped social status, where problems had solutions that didn't depend on popularity or wealth. I spent hours after school in the computer lab, learning languages like Python and Java, building simple programs that made me feel powerful for the first time in years. "You have real talent, Alexandra," Mr. Harrison told me one afternoon as I worked on a complex algorithm. "Have you thought about studying computer science in college?" The question seemed absurd. College was for kids like Jessica, whose parents had savings accounts and connections. But Mr. Harrison persisted, helping me research scholarships and guiding me through applications to universities I'd never dreamed of attending. The guidance counselor, Mrs. Fletcher, was less encouraging. During our mandatory college planning meeting, she looked at my file with barely concealed disdain. "Maybe you should consider community college or a trade school," she suggested, her tone making it clear she thought even that was ambitious. "Not everyone is cut out for university life." Her words stung, but they also fueled my determination. I would prove her wrong along with everyone else who had underestimated me. Senior year brought new humiliations and old wounds reopened. The yearbook committee, dominated by Jessica's crowd, created a series of superlatives that were really just another opportunity to mock the unpopular kids. I wasn't surprised when my name appeared under "most likely to fail," accompanied by a photograph they'd chosen for my worst school picture day. The image showed me with unwashed hair and a shirt that was clearly too big, my eyes red from crying after another brutal encounter with my tormentors. But alongside that cruel prediction, something beautiful was taking shape. My college applications had been accepted, and I'd received a full scholarship to study computer science at a prestigious university 3 states away. The scholarship covered tuition, room, and board, meaning I could finally escape Millbrook and build a new life. I told no one except my parents, who cried tears of pride and relief when I showed them the acceptance letter. Graduation day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance typical of small-town celebrations. I sat in the back row, invisible as always, while Jessica Morrison was crowned valedictorian despite her mediocre grades, a position that was more about family connections than academic achievement. During the ceremony, they read the yearbook superlatives aloud, and the laughter that accompanied "most likely to fail" still echoes in my memory. I smiled and waved when my name was called, hiding the fury and determination burning in my chest. After the ceremony, I watched my classmates take pictures with their families, exchange phone numbers, and make promises to stay in touch. Nobody approached me or asked for my contact information. I was leaving Millbrook as invisibly as I'd lived there, which was exactly how I wanted it. Let them forget about Alexandra Rivera. Someday, they would remember me in ways they never expected. College was a revelation that went beyond academic learning. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who valued intelligence over appearance, creativity over conformity. My roommate, Sarah Kim, came from a similar background of financial struggle, and we bonded over our shared determination to succeed despite the odds. We studied together, supported each other through difficult courses, and dreamed about the futures we were building with every assignment completed and every exam passed. The computer science program was demanding, but I thrived in ways I'd never imagined possible. Professors who had earned their reputations through groundbreaking research took me seriously, offering guidance and opportunities that opened doors I hadn't known existed. I spent summers doing internships at tech companies, learning not just how to code, but how to think like an entrepreneur. The seeds of what would become my empire were planted during those long nights in computer labs, debugging programs and solving problems that seemed impossible. During my junior year, I had an idea that would change everything. I was working on a project involving data analysis when I realized how inefficient most small businesses were at managing their customer information. They were drowning in spreadsheets and paper files, losing opportunities because they couldn't track leads effectively or understand their customers' needs. I saw a gap in the market for affordable, user-friendly software that could help these businesses organize their data and grow their profits. I spent months developing a prototype, working 18-hour days fueled by coffee and determination. Sarah watched me disappear into my code, emerging only for classes and meals, completely obsessed with perfecting my vision. The software I created was elegant in its simplicity, powerful enough to handle complex data but intuitive enough for non-technical users to master quickly. I called it Connect Flow, and I knew it would be revolutionary. My senior year was devoted to refining Connect Flow and preparing for launch. I entered business plan competitions, won several prestigious awards, and caught the attention of venture capitalists who saw the potential in my idea. The day I graduated, I already had seed funding secured and a small team of developers ready to help me build my company. The girl who had been voted most likely to fail was about to become an entrepreneur. The early days of running Connect Flow were brutal. I worked from a cramped apartment with unreliable internet, surviving on ramen noodles and pure ambition. There were nights when I questioned everything, when the weight of responsibility felt crushing and the path to success seemed impossibly steep. But every time I felt like giving up, I remembered Jessica Morrison's laughter, Mrs. Fletcher's dismissive tone, and the yearbook photograph that had branded me a failure. Those memories became fuel for the fire burning inside me. Within 2 years, Connect Flow had grown from a one-person operation to a company with 50 employees and offices in 3 cities. Small businesses across the country were using our software to streamline their operations and increase their profits. The success stories poured in daily. Business owners who credited Connect Flow with saving their companies and transforming their lives. I had created something meaningful, something that made a real difference in the world. The tech industry began to take notice. I was invited to speak at conferences, featured in magazines, and recognized as one of the rising stars in entrepreneurship. Each accolade felt like a small victory against everyone who had dismissed me, but I wasn't satisfied yet. I wanted more than professional recognition. I wanted the kind of success that would be impossible to ignore or diminish. By my 5th year in business, Connect Flow had become the leading customer management platform for small to medium businesses. We'd been acquired by a larger tech company for $120 million, making me wealthy beyond my teenage dreams. But instead of retiring or moving on to another venture, I used the acquisition money to fund my next project, an artificial intelligence platform that promised to revolutionize how businesses understood their customers. The AI venture, which I named IntelliGrowth, was even more successful than ConnectFlow. Within 3 years, we'd secured contracts with Fortune 500 companies and expanded internationally. The valuation of my company reached astronomical heights, and suddenly I was being mentioned in the same conversations as tech titans whose names were household words. I was 31 years old and worth more than $300 million. Success brought opportunities I'd never imagined. I bought a penthouse apartment in Manhattan with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the city skyline. My closet was filled with designer clothes that fit perfectly, tailored specifically for my body by craftspeople whose waiting lists stretched for months. I drove a Tesla Model S and owned vacation homes in 3 countries. Every material want was satisfied, but the hunger for vindication remained. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 10 years after I'd graduated from Millbrook High. Sarah Kim, who had remained my closest friend despite our divergent career paths, was visiting when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end belonged to Principal Davidson, who had replaced the old principal shortly after my graduation. "Ms. Rivera," he said with the kind of deference I'd never heard from school officials before. "I hope you remember me from your time at Millbrook High. I'm calling because we're embarking on a major renovation project, and we're reaching out to successful alumni who might be interested in supporting their alma mater." The irony was delicious. The school that had failed to protect me from years of bullying was now asking for my money. I listened politely as Principal Davidson explained their funding shortfall, their ambitious plans for modernization, and their hope that former students would contribute to securing Millbrook High's future. He mentioned several significant donors, including the Morrison family, Jessica's parents, who had pledged $500,000 in exchange for having the new gymnasium named after their daughter. "How much do you need?" I asked, interrupting his well-rehearsed pitch. "Well, we're hoping to raise $5 million total," he said, his voice brightening with hope. "Any contribution would be meaningful, of course. Even $1,000 would help us reach our goal." $1,000. The man was asking a woman worth hundreds of millions for pocket change, clearly having no idea who he was speaking with. I could have laughed at the absurdity, but instead I saw an opportunity more perfect than anything I could have planned. "Principal Davidson," I said carefully, "I'm prepared to write a check for the full amount, but I have conditions." The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 10 seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The full amount? $5 million? "That's correct, but as I said, I have conditions. I want the school renamed the Alexandra Rivera Center for Excellence. I want my name on the main building, the entrance, and all official correspondence. I want a plaque in the lobby detailing my contributions to education and technology, and I want final approval on any other naming rights granted in the future." Another long pause. "Ms. Rivera, that's incredibly generous, but renaming the entire school would require board approval, community input, and—" "Then get the approvals," I interrupted. "I'm sure the community will be very supportive when they understand that their children's education depends on my generosity. I'll give you 2 weeks to make it happen." I hung up the phone and turned to Sarah, who was staring at me with amazement and concern. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. $5 million is a lot of money, even for you." "It's not about the money," I replied, feeling a satisfaction I hadn't experienced since selling my first company. It's about justice. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of phone calls, meetings, and negotiations. Principal Davidson kept me updated on the board's deliberations, the community meetings, and the inevitable resistance from some longtime residents who felt uncomfortable with such a dramatic change. But money talks louder than tradition, and my offer was too generous to refuse. The final vote was unanimous. The announcement was made on a Friday afternoon through the local newspaper and social media. Knowbrook High School to be renamed in honor of tech entrepreneur's historic donation. My photograph, a professional headshot taken for a recent magazine profile, accompanied the article. I was wearing a tailored black blazer and a confident smile, looking nothing like the frightened girl who had once walked those hallways in shame. The reactions were immediate and varied. Former classmates reached out through social media, some offering congratulations, others expressing surprise that I had achieved such success. Many of the messages carried undertones of disbelief, as if they couldn't reconcile their memories of the outcast girl with the accomplished woman I'd become. But the response I treasured most came from an unexpected source. Jessica Morrison, now Jessica Morrison Phillips, sent me a friend request on Facebook along with a private message. Alexandra, I just saw the news about the school. Congratulations on your success. I wanted to reach out because I've been thinking about high school lately. And I realize I wasn't always kind to you. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel bad. I hope we can be friends now. Her message was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive revisionism. Wasn't always kind was a euphemism that barely scratched the surface of her cruelty, and made you feel bad trivialized years of systematic harassment. But the very fact that she felt compelled to reach out, to acknowledge our shared history, and position herself as someone seeking my friendship was victory enough. I crafted my response carefully. Jessica, thank you for reaching out. High school was certainly a formative experience for both of us. I'm glad to hear you're doing well, and I appreciate your message. I kept it brief, professional, and deliberately ambiguous. Let her wonder what I really thought. Let her question whether I harbored resentment or had truly moved past our history. The dedication ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday in November, timed to coincide with the homecoming football game so that maximum attendance would be guaranteed. I spent weeks preparing for the event, not just logistically but emotionally. This would be my first time back in Millbrook since graduation, my first encounter with the people and places that had shaped my character through adversity. I chose my outfit with the same care military generals select their battle armor. A midnight blue dress by a designer whose name my former classmates would recognize, paired with heels that added 3 inches to my height and a confidence that radiated from every step. My hair was styled by the same artist who worked with Broadway performers, and my makeup was applied by a professional whose client list included movie stars. I looked like power, success, and vindication wrapped in elegant packaging. The morning of the ceremony, I stood in my hotel room looking out at the town where I'd spent my formative years. Millbrook looked smaller than I remembered, shabbier, like a movie set that had been impressive from a distance, but revealed its flaws under closer inspection. The houses seemed cramped, the streets narrower, the whole place diminished by my expanded perspective. I was no longer the frightened girl who had fled this place in shame. I was returning as a conqueror. My parents arrived at the hotel an hour before the ceremony, both dressed in their finest clothes and radiating pride that made my chest tight with emotion. My father, now in his 60s with silver hair and hands still rough from decades of manual labor, hugged me with tears in his eyes. "We always knew you were special, mija," he whispered. "But this is beyond anything we dreamed." My mother, elegant in a dress I'd bought for her, touched my face gently. "Remember where you came from," she said, "but never forget how far you've traveled." Her words carried the weight of every sacrifice she'd made, every house she'd cleaned, every night she'd worked late so I could have school supplies and lunch money. The ceremony took place in the school's main courtyard, where hundreds of folding chairs had been arranged facing a small stage. A podium decorated with flowers stood beneath a canvas banner that would be removed to reveal the new name plaque. The attendance was impressive. Community members, school board officials, local politicians, and scattered groups of former classmates who had heard about the event through social media and curiosity. I spotted Jessica immediately, sitting in the third row with her husband and 2 young children. She had gained weight since high school, and her blonde hair showed signs of premature graying, but her smile was as calculated as ever. When our eyes met, she waved enthusiastically, as if we were old friends reuniting after years apart. I nodded politely and continued scanning the crowd. Madison Chen was there too, now working as a real estate agent according to her Facebook profile, along with Brittany Walsh, who had become a stay-at-home mother after marrying her high school boyfriend. They whispered to each other and pointed in my direction, their expressions mixing curiosity with something that might have been envy. The popular crowd that had once seemed so untouchable now looked ordinary, weighed down by the same mundane concerns that affected everyone else. Principal Davidson introduced me with glowing praise, detailing my business achievements and philanthropic efforts in terms that made me sound like a combination of Einstein and Mother Teresa. As I walked to the podium, the applause was enthusiastic, though I could detect an undercurrent of discomfort from some audience members who remembered the awkward girl I'd once been. My speech was carefully crafted to sound gracious while delivering subtle messages to specific audience members. "Education has always been transformative in my life," I began, "and I believe every student deserves the opportunity to reach their full potential. Regardless of their background or circumstances, this school has played a crucial role in shaping who I am today, teaching me lessons that extended far beyond the classroom." I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the crowd, lingering momentarily on Jessica and her former followers. I learned about resilience here, about the power of persistence in the face of adversity. I discovered that true strength comes not from tearing others down, but from building something meaningful that lifts everyone up. Those lessons have guided every decision in my career and led to the success that makes this donation possible. The applause was polite, but subdued. Some audience members shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing the subtle references to my high school experience. I continued with more conventional remarks about education and community support, but my real message had been delivered to those who needed to hear it. When the moment came to unveil the new name, Principal Davidson invited me to join him at the banner. Together, we pulled the cord that revealed the brass plaque reading, "The Alexandra Rivera Center for Excellence," in elegant script. The crowd erupted in applause, cameras flashed, and I felt a surge of satisfaction so intense it was almost overwhelming. After the ceremony, I was approached by dozens of people wanting to shake hands, take photographs, and associate themselves with my success. Former teachers who had barely noticed me in school now claimed to have always seen my potential. Classmates who had ignored or mocked me suddenly remembered shared moments that had never happened. The transformation was as fascinating as it was predictable. Jessica finally approached during the reception, her children in tow, and her smile almost painful in its brightness. "Alexandra!" she exclaimed, embracing me as if we were lifelong friends. This is so amazing. I always knew you'd do something incredible. Remember how I used to say you were so smart in math class? The revisionist history was breathtaking. Jessica had never complimented my intelligence, had never acknowledged my academic achievements, except to mock them. But I played along, returning her embrace and smiling warmly. It's so good to see you, Jessica. Your children are beautiful. I hope they'll benefit from the new programs we're implementing here. Oh, they will, she gushed. We're so grateful for your generosity. And I was just telling my husband about our friendship in high school. You were always so focused and determined. I admired that about you. The lies flowed so smoothly, I almost admired their audacity. But I also recognized the desperation beneath her performance. Jessica needed me to validate her rewritten history, to confirm that she had been a friend rather than a tormentor. Her social status in Millbrook now depended partly on her perceived connection to me, and she was working hard to establish that narrative. High school seems like a lifetime ago, I replied diplomatically. We've all grown and changed so much since then. As the reception continued, I was approached by Mrs. Fletcher, the guidance counselor who had discouraged my college ambitions. She was older now, her hair completely gray and her manner less confident than I remembered. Alexandra, she said hesitantly, I wanted to congratulate you on your remarkable success. You've certainly exceeded everyone's expectations. The irony was perfect. The woman who had suggested I wasn't cut out for university life was now praising achievements that had grown directly from the education she'd tried to discourage. I could have reminded her of our conversation, could have quoted her exact words about community college and trade school. Instead, I chose a different approach. Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher. I was fortunate to have teachers who believed in me and encouraged me to reach higher. Their support made all the difference. The compliment was technically accurate since I was thinking of Mr. Harrison, but it left her uncertain whether I was including her in that group of supportive educators. The day concluded with a private dinner attended by school board members, major donors, and local officials. I sat at the head table, the guest of honor whose generosity had made the entire renovation possible. The conversation flowed around topics of education policy, community development, and economic growth, with frequent references to my insights and opinions. These people, who represented the power structure that had failed to protect me as a student, now sought my approval and guidance. During dessert, Board President Margaret Collins raised her glass for a toast. To Alexandra Rivera, she announced, whose vision and generosity will impact generations of students. You've shown us all what's possible when talent meets opportunity and determination meets resources. Thank you for choosing to invest in our board. Community's future. The toast was echoed around the table, and I stood to acknowledge the recognition. Thank you all for this warm welcome, I replied. It means everything to me to know that students here will have opportunities I could only dream of when I walked these halls. Success isn't measured only in financial terms. It's measured in the positive impact we have on others. I hope this school will be a place where every student, regardless of their background, feels valued and supported in pursuing their dreams. As I spoke those words, I thought about the frightened girl who had once eaten lunch alone, who had been humiliated in front of the entire school, who had been voted most likely to fail by classmates who couldn't imagine her potential. That girl could never have envisioned this moment, could never have predicted that her name would become synonymous with excellence in the very place where she'd been dismissed as worthless. The drive back to my hotel took me past familiar landmarks that looked different through the lens of my transformation. The convenience store where I'd counted pennies to buy school supplies, the park where I'd hidden to eat lunch and avoid the cafeteria harassment, the street corner where Jessica had once pushed me off my bicycle while her friends laughed. Each location held memories of pain and humiliation, but they no longer had power over me. They had become stepping stones in my journey rather than monuments to my suffering. In my hotel room that night, I sat by the window looking out at Millbrook's modest skyline, processing the events of the day. My phone buzzed constantly with congratulatory messages from business associates, friends, and former classmates who had suddenly remembered our friendship. Social media was exploding with posts about the ceremony, photographs of the new plaque, and commentary about my transformation from outcast to benefactor. But the message that mattered most came from Mr. Harrison, my old computer science teacher who was now retired but had attended the ceremony. "Alexandra," he wrote, "I watched you today with immense pride, not because of your financial success, but because of the grace and dignity you showed. You could have used this moment for revenge, but instead you chose to create opportunity for others. That's the mark of true character. Thank you for proving that our faith in you was justified." His words brought tears to my eyes because they recognized something I hadn't fully acknowledged myself. This day could have been about vengeance, about humiliating the people who had hurt me or exposing their hypocrisy. Instead, I had chosen a path that elevated everyone, that transformed pain into purpose and resentment into generosity. The victory was sweeter because it was built on creation rather than destruction. The next morning brought local and regional media attention. Reporters wanted to interview the tech entrepreneur who had transformed her hometown school, the rags to riches story that embodied the American dream. I gave several interviews, always emphasizing education, opportunity, and the importance of supporting young people regardless of their circumstances. I never mentioned the bullying, never referenced my difficult high school experience directly, but the subtext was clear to anyone who cared to read between the lines. One interview question stood out. "What would you say to your high school self if you could go back in time?" I considered the question carefully before answering. "I would tell her that the people who try to diminish you are often fighting their own battles with insecurity and fear. I would remind her that temporary circumstances don't define permanent identity. Most importantly, I would tell her that the strength she's building through adversity will become the foundation for achievements she can't yet imagine." As I prepared to leave Millbrook and return to my life in New York, I made one final stop at the school. The brass plaque gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, my name permanently etched into the institution that had once been the source of my greatest pain. Students were arriving for evening activities, walking beneath my name without knowing the story behind it, benefiting from opportunities my donation had created. A group of girls caught my attention, 3 friends walking together and laughing about something one of them had said. They reminded me of myself and my imaginary friends, the companionship I'd created in my mind to ward off loneliness. But these girls were real, their friendship genuine, their laughter unforced. Maybe because of the programs my donation would fund, maybe because of the culture change my investment would inspire, maybe because each generation learns from the mistakes of the previous one, these students would have better experiences than I had. One of the girls, a bookish-looking sophomore with glasses and an oversized backpack, smiled and waved as she walked past. She reminded me so much of my younger self that my breath caught. I waved back, hoping she would never know the kind of pain I had endured, hoping she would find support and encouragement in these halls rather than cruelty and dismissal. The drive to the airport gave me time to reflect on what I had accomplished and what it meant for my future. The girl who had left Millbrook 10 years ago as an invisible nobody had returned as a woman whose name would be spoken daily by thousands of students, teachers, and parents. Every morning announcement, every graduation ceremony, every official school communication would include my name. It was immortality of a sort, a permanence that no amount of teenage cruelty could erase. But more than personal vindication, I had created something meaningful. The $5 million would fund new computer labs, updated science equipment, expanded library resources, and scholarship programs for students from low-income families. Young people who faced the same obstacles I had encountered would have better support, more opportunities, clearer paths to success. My pain had been transformed into their potential. The success felt different from my business achievements. Making money, building companies, earning recognition in my industry, all of these accomplishments had been satisfying but somehow incomplete. This donation, this transformation of my relationship with the place that had shaped me, felt like the completion of a circle that began with that humiliating day in the cafeteria when Jessica Morrison had knocked my lunch to the floor. Back in New York, life resumed its familiar rhythms. Board meetings, product development sessions, investor calls, and strategic planning filled my days. But something fundamental had shifted. The wound that had driven me for so many years, the need to prove myself worthy of respect and recognition, had finally healed. I no longer carried the weight of teenage humiliation or the burden of unresolved resentment. 6 months later, I received an invitation to speak at the first graduation ceremony to be held at the Alexandra Rivera Center for Excellence. Principal Davidson explained that they wanted me to address the graduating class and share insights about perseverance and success. I accepted immediately, knowing this would be the perfect opportunity to complete the transformation that had begun with my donation. The graduation ceremony was held in the same auditorium where I had once sat in shame, listening to my name called under "most likely to fail." Now I would stand at the podium, where my yearbook superlative had been announced, addressing students who would leave high school with my name echoing in their memories. The symmetry was perfect, the vindication complete. My speech focused on the importance of resilience, the power of education, and the responsibility that comes with success. I talked about setbacks and comebacks, about the difference between temporary defeat and permanent failure, about the choice to build rather than destroy. The graduating seniors listened intently, perhaps sensing that my words carried the weight of personal experience rather than generic inspiration. "Your high school years are just the beginning of your story," I told them, looking out at young faces full of hope and uncertainty. "The challenges you face today, the setbacks you encounter, the moments when others doubt your potential, these are not endings but beginnings. They are the raw materials from which you will build your character and your future. What matters is not what happens to you, but what you choose to do with what happens to you." In the audience, I spotted familiar faces from my own graduating class. Jessica Morrison Phillips was there with her eldest child, who was among the graduates. She watched me intently, perhaps finally understanding the magnitude of what I had achieved and what it meant about the girl she had once tormented. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something in her expression that might have been regret, or possibly just discomfort at the reversal of our positions. After the ceremony, I was approached by Emily Rodriguez, the valedictorian, a bright girl whose parents worked in the same kind of blue-collar jobs my father had held. She thanked me for the scholarship that would help her attend MIT, for the computer lab where she had discovered her passion for programming, for the example I had set about rising above circumstances. "Ms. Rivera," she said, "I wanted you to know that your story has meant everything to me. When people told me I should lower my expectations, when teachers suggested I wasn't college material, I thought about you and kept pushing forward. Thank you for showing us what's possible." Her words brought tears to my eyes because they represented the true victory. Not the brass plaque bearing my name, not the revenge against former tormentors, not even the personal vindication of financial success. The real triumph was in the young woman standing before me, armed with confidence and opportunity, prepared to write her own story of transformation and achievement. As I left Millbrook for what I knew would likely be the last time, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me throughout my years of business success. The scared, humiliated girl who had fled this place in 2015 had finally come home, not to reclaim her past, but to transform it into something beautiful and meaningful for others. The brass plaque reading, "The Alexandra Rivera Center for Excellence would outlast all of us," would be read by students who never knew my story, who would benefit from opportunities created by experiences they couldn't imagine. My name, once spoken only in mockery, would become synonymous with excellence, generosity, and the transformative power of education. Sometimes I wonder what my teenage self would think if she could see where the path of pain and determination would lead. Would she be amazed by the penthouse apartment, the successful companies, the millions in the bank? Or would she be most impressed by the simple fact that she survived, that she transformed hurt into healing, that she chose to build rather than destroy? I think she would be proudest of the choice to return not as a conqueror seeking revenge, but as a benefactor creating opportunity. Because in the end, the greatest victory was not in proving my worth to people who had never deserved the power to judge it, but in using my success to ensure that other students would never feel as alone and worthless as I once had. The phone calls started coming within weeks of the graduation ceremony. Alumni from various years were reaching out, some apologizing for their behavior, others trying to rewrite history, many simply wanting to reconnect with someone who had achieved the kind of success they wished for their own children. I handled each conversation with the same gracious professionalism I brought to business dealings, neither accepting false apologies nor rejecting genuine attempts at reconciliation. But the most meaningful contact came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson, the lunch lady who had tried to help me on that terrible day when Jessica knocked my food to the floor, sent me a handwritten letter through the school. She was now retired but had heard about my donation and wanted me to know how proud she was of what I had accomplished. "Dear Alexandra," she wrote in careful cursive, "I remember you as a sweet girl who always said please and thank you, even when you were hurting. I used to watch you eat alone and wish I could do more to help. But I was just the lunch lady and didn't think it was my place. When I heard about your generous gift to the school, I cried tears of joy. You have shown everyone what kindness and determination can achieve. Thank you for proving that good people finish first when they refuse to give up." Her letter moved me more than any business accolade or media recognition ever had. Mrs. Patterson had seen me during my most vulnerable moments and remembered not my humiliation but my humanity. She had recognized something worthwhile in the girl others dismissed, and her validation meant everything because it came from a place of genuine care rather than self-interest. I wrote back immediately, thanking her for her kindness during those difficult years and letting her know that her small gestures of compassion had meant more than she could have imagined. I also included a check for $10,000, asking her to use it however she wanted. whether for herself or to help other students she encountered who might need support. Her response was another tear-stained letter expressing gratitude and promising to establish a small fund to help students who couldn't afford lunch. The ripple effects of my donation continued to unfold in ways I hadn't anticipated. The school board, emboldened by the success of the renovation project, began implementing programs I had suggested, initiatives focused on anti-bullying, mental health support, and academic enrichment for underserved students. They hired additional counselors, created peer mentorship programs, and established clear protocols for addressing harassment and exclusion. Principal Davidson kept me updated on these developments, clearly hoping to maintain my interest and possibly secure additional donations in the future. I appreciated his transparency, but made it clear that my involvement would be limited. I had accomplished what I needed to accomplish in Millbrook. The rest was up to them. The business world took notice of my philanthropic gesture in ways that surprised me. Several media outlets ran feature stories about successful entrepreneurs giving back to their communities, and I was invited to speak at conferences about corporate social responsibility and educational, philanthropy. The donation had enhanced my professional reputation while satisfying my personal need for closure. But perhaps the most gratifying development was the message I received from a current student at the school, a junior named Marcus Williams who had heard about my story from one of his teachers. He was being bullied for his interest in theater and his academic focus, experiencing the same kind of social exclusion I had endured. His email was heartbreaking in its familiarity. "Ms. Rivera," he wrote, "Mr. Harrison told me about how you were treated in high school and how you turned it into motivation for success. I'm going through similar stuff now, and sometimes I want to give up, but knowing that someone like you went to this school and made it through gives me hope. I want to study business in college and maybe start my own company someday. Do you have any advice for someone like me?" I spent hours crafting my response, trying to find the right balance of honesty and encouragement. I told him about the importance of focusing on grades and future goals rather than present social dynamics. I shared specific strategies for dealing with bullies, emphasizing the temporary nature of high school social structures and the vastly different dynamics he would encounter in college and beyond. Most importantly, I assured him that his current experiences, painful as they were, could become sources of strength if he chose to view them that way. I told him about my own transformation from victim to victor, about the way adversity had forged my character and fueled my ambition. I wanted him to understand that he was not powerless, that his future was not determined by other people's opinions or actions. Our correspondence continued throughout his junior and senior years. I became an informal mentor, offering guidance on college applications, scholarship opportunities, and career planning. When he was accepted to several universities with significant financial aid packages, I felt the same pride I might have experienced for a younger sibling. His success represented the true purpose of my donation, the way individual lives could be changed through opportunity and support. Marcus graduated as salutatorian of his class, gave a speech about perseverance and authentic success, and went on to study business administration at a prestigious university. His transformation from isolated target to confident leader mirrored my own journey in many ways, but his path was smoother because the school environment had improved and because he had received the kind of mentorship I had lacked. As my own story with Millbrook reached its natural conclusion, I began to think about broader applications of the lessons I had learned. The experience of transforming pain into purpose, of using success for positive impact, had shown me possibilities I hadn't previously considered. I started exploring other philanthropic opportunities, always with an emphasis on education and empowerment for young people facing adversity. I established the Rivera Foundation, focused on providing scholarships, mentorship, and support programs for students from low-income families who showed academic promise despite challenging circumstances. The foundation's motto was, "Transforming today's challenges into tomorrow's triumphs," a philosophy drawn directly from my own experience of turning adolescent suffering into adult success. The Foundation's first major initiative was a program pairing successful professionals with high school students who were experiencing bullying or social exclusion. We called it the Rising Above program, and it provided not just emotional support but practical guidance on academic planning, college preparation, and career development. The response was overwhelming, with both mentors and students eager to participate. Working with these young people brought me full circle in ways I hadn't expected. Their stories were heartbreakingly familiar, variations on themes of exclusion, humiliation, and academic struggle against social obstacles. But they also showed me how much had changed since my own high school years. Technology provided new opportunities for connection and learning. Social awareness of bullying had increased dramatically, and resources for support were more readily available. Yet the fundamental human dynamics remained unchanged. Teenagers still formed hierarchies based on superficial characteristics, still wielded cruelty as a weapon of social control, still underestimated peers who didn't fit conventional definitions of success. The work of creating more inclusive, supportive educational environments was far from complete. 5 years after my donation to Millbrook High, I received an invitation that brought the story full circle. The school was celebrating its 10th anniversary as the Alexandra Rivera Center for Excellence, and they wanted me to deliver the keynote address at a special ceremony honoring the achievements of the past decade. The statistics they shared were impressive. Graduation rates had increased by 20%, college enrollment among graduates had risen by 35%, and reported incidents of bullying had decreased by more than half. The computer science program had become one of the strongest in the state, and several students had gone on to prestigious universities and successful careers in technology. But the numbers that mattered most to me were more personal. Marcus Williams had graduated from college and was launching his own startup, using skills he had developed in the very computer lab my donation had funded. Emily Rodriguez had completed her degree at MIT and was working as a software engineer at a major tech company, actively mentoring other students from underrepresented backgrounds. Most significantly, the school had established the Alexandra Rivera Scholarship, a permanent endowment providing full college funding for one deserving student each year. The recipients were chosen not just for academic excellence, but for their ability to overcome adversity and their commitment to helping others. They were students who embodied the transformation I had experienced, young people who had turned challenges into character and setbacks into comebacks. Standing once again at the podium in Millbrook, looking out at an audience that included community leaders, educators, students, and families whose lives had been touched by the programs my donation had made possible, I felt a sense of completion that transcended personal vindication. The frightened girl who had once sat in the back row, invisible and dismissed, had become the woman whose vision was shaping the educational experience for generations of students. My speech that day was different from the carefully diplomatic remarks I had delivered at previous school events. This time, I spoke more openly about my own experiences, about the pain of exclusion and the power of persistence. I talked about the choice between bitterness and betterment, between revenge and renewal, between looking backward in anger and looking forward with purpose. 10 years ago, I told the audience, I stood in the same auditorium as a student who had been labeled a failure by her peers. Today, I stand here as proof that other people's judgments are not permanent sentences. What matters is not how others see you in your worst moments, but how you choose to see yourself in your best ones. I looked directly at the current students in the audience, particularly those who seemed uncomfortable or out of place, who reminded me of my younger self. To the students who feel like outsiders, who question whether you belong, who wonder if you have what it takes to succeed, I want you to know that your current circumstances are not your permanent destiny. The very experiences that make you feel different, that cause you pain today, may become the sources of your greatest strength tomorrow. The applause that followed was different from any I had received before. It was not polite recognition or impressed acknowledgement of my success. It was genuine appreciation for honesty, gratitude for inspiration, and recognition of authentic connection between speaker and audience. These people understood that my words came from experience rather than theory, from transformation rather than imagination. After the ceremony, I was approached by current students, parents, and community members who wanted to share their own stories of overcoming adversity. A sophomore girl told me about standing up to bullies who had been targeting her friend. A senior boy described how the computer programming class had changed his perspective on his future possibilities. A parent thanked me for creating an environment where her daughter felt safe to be herself. But the encounter that moved me most was with an elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Morrison, Jessica's mother. I recognized her immediately, though she had aged considerably since my high school years. Her approach was hesitant, her manner uncertain, suggesting she was uncomfortable with what she felt compelled to say. "Alexandra," she began quietly, "I wanted to apologize for my daughter's behavior when you were students here. Jessica has told me some of the things that happened, and I'm ashamed that we didn't do more to stop it. We knew she could be cruel, but we told ourselves it was just typical teenage behavior. We were wrong, and I'm sorry." Her apology was unexpected and deeply appreciated. It took courage for her to acknowledge her family's role in my suffering and to accept responsibility for failing to address behavior they had witnessed. I thanked her sincerely, appreciating both her honesty and her willingness to confront an uncomfortable truth. "Mrs. Morrison," I replied, "I appreciate you saying that. What happened in high school was difficult, but it also taught me valuable lessons about resilience and determination. I hope the programs we've implemented here will help other students avoid similar experiences." As I prepared to leave Millbrook for what I knew would probably be my final visit, I took one last walk through the hallways that had once been a source of dread and humiliation. The walls were now decorated with motivational posters, student artwork, and photographs of academic and extracurricular achievements. The atmosphere felt different, more inclusive and supportive than I remembered. In the computer lab that bore a small plaque acknowledging my donation, students were working on projects that would have seemed impossible during my time at the school. They had access to cutting-edge equipment, expert instruction, and opportunities to explore fields that hadn't even existed when I was their age. Their focused concentration and animated discussions reminded me of my own discovery of programming under Mr. Harrison's guidance. The cafeteria where I had experienced my most humiliating moment had been renovated and expanded. Students sat in diverse groups, engaged in lively conversations that crossed traditional social boundaries. The atmosphere was welcoming rather than hierarchical, inclusive rather than exclusive. While I knew that teenage social dynamics would never be completely eliminated, the visible improvements gave me hope that current students were having better experiences than I had endured. My final stop was the library, where I had spent countless hours studying and dreaming of a different future. The space had been modernized with new technology and expanded resources, but it retained the quiet sanctuary quality that had made it my refuge during difficult times. I sat in the same chair where I had once planned my escape from Millbrook, now reflecting on my return as a benefactor and mentor. The transformation was complete, but not in the way I had originally imagined. My teenage fantasies of revenge had evolved into something far more meaningful, a legacy of positive change that would outlast any personal satisfaction I might have gained from humiliating former tormentors. The girl who had been voted most likely to fail had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, but her greatest achievement was not personal wealth or professional recognition. It was the creation of opportunities for others to succeed, the establishment of support systems for students facing similar challenges, and the proof that temporary setbacks could become permanent triumphs. As I drove away from the Alexandra Rivera Center for Excellence for the final time, I felt a peace that had eluded me throughout my journey from victim to victor. The scared, hurt girl who had fled Millbrook 15 years earlier had finally come home, not to reclaim her past, but to transform it into something beautiful for future generations. My name would live on in that place, not as a monument to suffering survived, but as a symbol of hope for students who needed to believe that their current circumstances were not their permanent destiny. The story that began with humiliation in a high school cafeteria had ended with inspiration on a graduation stage. The girl they had called a nobody had become somebody not through revenge or resentment, but through resilience and generosity. And every student who would walk through those doors in years to come would carry with them the message that failure is temporary, success is possible, and the power to transform pain into purpose lies within each of us. That, I realized, was the real victory. Not the brass plaque bearing my name, not the grudging respect of former tormentors, not even the financial success that had made it all possible. The true triumph was in the knowledge that my story would inspire others to write their own tales of transformation, that my pain had been transformed into someone else's possibility, and that the legacy I left behind would be measured not in dollars donated, but in lives changed. The scared 16-year-old who had once eaten lunch alone in the library would be proud. I thought not of the money or the recognition, but of the choice to use success as a bridge rather than a weapon, to build others up rather than tear them down, and to prove that the best revenge is not revenge at all, but the creation of something so beautiful and meaningful that it transforms even the memory of injury into a source of inspiration. As the Alexandra Rivera Center for Excellence disappeared in my rearview mirror, I smiled, knowing that my story was now part of something larger than myself, woven into the fabric of a place that would continue to shape young lives long after my own chapter had ended. The girl they had called a nobody had become everybody's possibility, and that transformation was worth more than all the wealth and recognition in the world. But life had more surprises in store, and the ripple effects of my Millbrook investment would extend far beyond anything I had imagined when I first wrote that $5 million check. 3 months after the anniversary celebration, I received a call that would change everything once again. Dr. Amanda Chen, the State Superintendent of Education, had been following the remarkable transformation at Millbrook and wanted to discuss a much larger initiative. She invited me to the state capitol for a meeting that she described as potentially revolutionary for education across the entire state. The meeting took place in a gleaming conference room overlooking the city, where Dr. Chen presented data that was both impressive and troubling. While schools like Millbrook were thriving with proper funding and support, hundreds of other districts were struggling with outdated facilities, inadequate technology, and limited resources for addressing student mental health, and social issues. The achievement gap between wealthy and poor districts was widening, creating a two-tiered system that perpetuated inequality. "Alexandra," Dr. Chen said, spreading charts and reports across the polished table, "what you accomplished in Millbrook has become a model that other districts are desperate to replicate. We've had over 60 school boards contact us asking how they can implement similar programs. The problem is funding. Most districts don't have alumni with your resources or your commitment to educational excellence." End quote. She outlined her vision for a statewide initiative that would leverage public and private partnerships to transform struggling schools across the region. The program would focus on the same elements that had made Millbrook successful: updated technology, enhanced mental health support, anti-bullying programs, and scholarship opportunities for deserving students. The estimated cost was staggering, nearly $200 million over 5 years. "I know it's an enormous undertaking," Dr. Chen continued, "but imagine the impact. Thousands of students who are currently falling through the cracks would have access to the same opportunities you've created in Millbrook. We could break the cycle of educational inequality that's plagued our state for generations." The proposal was ambitious beyond anything I had previously considered, but it also represented the logical extension of everything I had learned about transforming individual pain into collective progress. I asked for time to consider the proposal and promised to respond within 2 weeks. That night, I called my parents to discuss the opportunity. My father, now retired but still sharp as ever, listened carefully as I explained the scope of the proposed initiative. "Mija," he said finally, "you've already done more than anyone could have expected. You don't owe the world anything else. But if you choose to do this, you'll be giving other kids what we couldn't give you, the support and opportunities that every child deserves." My mother was more cautious. "It's a lot of money, Alexandra, and a lot of responsibility. What if it doesn't work? What if people take advantage of your generosity?" Her concerns were valid, but they also reminded me of the fearful thinking that had kept our family trapped in poverty for so long. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all. I spent the following week researching similar initiatives in other states, analyzing success rates, and consulting with education experts about best practices for large-scale reform. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that this was not just an opportunity, but an obligation. My success had been built on the foundation of a single teacher who believed in me and a scholarship program that gave me a chance. How could I not extend similar opportunities to thousands of other students? The decision crystallized during a video call with Marcus Williams, my former mentee who was now successfully running his own tech startup. We had maintained our relationship over the years, and he had become something of a sounding board for my philanthropic decisions. When I explained Dr. Chen's proposal, his response was immediate and passionate. "Ms. Rivera," he said, his enthusiasm evident even through the computer screen, "you have to do this. I think about all the kids who are sitting in classrooms right now feeling the way we felt, thinking they don't matter, believing they're destined to fail. This initiative could reach students in hundreds of schools, kids who might never get the kind of mentorship and support that changed our lives." His words resonated deeply because they came from someone who had lived the transformation from victim to victor, who understood the difference that proper support and resources could make in a young person's life. Marcus wasn't speaking theoretically. He was speaking from experience, and his perspective carried weight that no expert analysis could match. I called Dr. Chen the next morning and committed to funding the entire initiative. The announcement was made at a press conference that drew state and national media attention. The Rivera Educational Excellence Initiative would target schools in underserved communities across the state, providing comprehensive support packages that included technology upgrades, mental health resources, teacher training, and student scholarship programs. The response was overwhelming. Within hours of the announcement, my office was flooded with calls from school districts wanting to participate, from educators sharing their stories of struggling students, and from parents desperate for better opportunities for their children. The magnitude of need was both heartbreaking and inspiring. But not everyone was supportive. Some critics questioned whether a single individual should have so much influence over public education policy. Others worried about the sustainability of programs that depended on private funding. A few cynics suggested that my philanthropy was motivated by tax benefits or publicity seeking, rather than genuine concern for educational equality. The criticism stung, particularly because it came from people who had never walked in my shoes, who had never experienced the isolation and despair that inadequate educational support could create. But I had learned long ago that success invites scrutiny, and that doing something meaningful often requires ignoring the voices of those who prefer to critique rather than contribute. The implementation of the Rivera Educational Excellence Initiative became a full-time endeavor that required hiring a dedicated staff and establishing partnerships with universities, nonprofits, and broad government agencies. I found myself traveling constantly, visiting potential partner schools, meeting with educators and administrators, and speaking at conferences about the importance of comprehensive educational reform. Each school visit reinforced my conviction that this work was necessary and urgent. In a rural district where students shared outdated textbooks and used computers that were over a decade old, I met brilliant young people whose potential was being wasted due to lack of resources. In an urban school where metal detectors and security guards created a prison-like atmosphere, I encountered dedicated teachers who were burning out from trying to address social and emotional needs they weren't trained to handle. But I also saw glimmers of hope and possibility. In every school, there were students like my younger self, hungry for knowledge and desperate for someone to believe in their potential. There were teachers like Mr. Harrison, committed to making a difference despite systemic obstacles. There were parents like mine, working multiple jobs but still finding time to support their children's education. The first cohort of Rivera Initiative schools was selected through a rigorous application process that prioritized districts with the greatest need and the strongest commitment to implementing comprehensive reforms. 30 schools across the state were chosen to receive funding packages ranging from $1 million to $5 million each, depending on their size and specific needs. The transformation began immediately. Within 6 months, participating schools reported significant improvements in student engagement, teacher retention, and academic performance. More importantly, they documented dramatic decreases in bullying incidents, disciplinary problems, and student mental health crises. The comprehensive approach was working exactly as we had hoped. One of the most successful implementations was at Roosevelt Middle School, a Title I institution in the state's largest city where 60% of students qualified for free lunch and academic achievement had lagged behind state averages for over a decade. Principal Maria Santos had applied for Rivera Initiative funding with a detailed plan that addressed not just academic needs, but the social and emotional challenges her students faced daily. Within a year of receiving funding, Roosevelt had been transformed. New computer labs buzzed with activity as students learned coding and digital design. The library had become a multimedia learning center where students could access online courses, receive tutoring, and participate in creative projects. Most significantly, the school had hired additional counselors and social workers who provided individual and group support for students dealing with trauma, family instability, and mental health challenges. I visited Roosevelt during their first-year celebration, and the change was remarkable. Students who had previously been disengaged and disruptive were now participating enthusiastically in academic and extracurricular activities. Teachers reported higher job satisfaction and renewed passion for their work. Test scores had improved, but more importantly, the school culture had shifted from one of survival to one of thriving. The most moving moment of my visit came during a student assembly where several 8th graders shared how the new programs had impacted their lives. A girl named Sofia Rodriguez talked about overcoming severe anxiety with help from the school's new mental health counselor. A boy named Terrell Washington described how the coding class had sparked his interest in computer science and given him goals for high school and beyond. But the presentation that brought tears to my eyes came from Isabella Martinez, a quiet girl who reminded me powerfully of my younger self. She had been bullied relentlessly for her academic focus and her family's financial struggles until the school's new peer mediation program helped resolve the conflicts and create a more supportive environment. "Before the Rivera Initiative," Isabella said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, "I thought school was just something to get through, something to survive until I could escape. Now I see it as a place where I can grow and learn and become the person I want to be. Ms. Rivera, thank you for believing in students like me, even when we don't believe in ourselves." The thunderous applause that followed her words wasn't just appreciation for her courage in speaking publicly. It was recognition of a fundamental truth that the assembled students, teachers, and parents all understood. Education should be about possibility, not just survival, about building dreams rather than simply enduring hardship. As the Rivera Initiative expanded to additional schools, I began receiving invitations to speak at national education conferences, to consult with other states interested in implementing similar programs, and to advise federal policymakers on education reform. The girl who had once been invisible in her high school hallways was now being sought out as a thought leader on one of the most important issues facing American society. The irony was not lost on me. The same experiences that had once made me feel worthless, the bullying and exclusion that had driven me to the brink of despair, had ultimately given me the perspective and motivation necessary to help transform educational opportunities for thousands of students. My pain had become their possibility in ways that extended far beyond anything I had imagined when I first wrote that check to Millbrook High School. But success at this scale also brought new challenges and responsibilities. Managing the Rivera Foundation required sophisticated systems for monitoring outcomes, ensuring accountability, and maintaining the quality standards that had made our initial programs so effective. I found myself learning about educational policy, child psychology, and organizational management, fields far removed from the tech industry where I had built my fortune. The learning curve was steep, that it was also exhilarating. Working with educators, researchers, and students reminded me why I had fallen in love with learning in the first place. Every day brought new problems to solve, new opportunities to innovate, and new evidence that comprehensive support could transform young lives in measurable ways. 2 years into the Rivera Initiative, I received a letter that would reshape my understanding of the program's impact. It came from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a researcher at the state university who had been conducting an independent evaluation of our school's progress. Her findings were remarkable, documenting not just academic improvements but significant positive changes in student mental health, teacher satisfaction, and community engagement. But Dr. Walsh's letter went beyond statistical analysis. She wanted to share a personal story that illustrated the initiative's human impact. Her daughter Emma had been a struggling student at one of our partner schools, dealing with learning disabilities and social anxiety that had made school a source of daily trauma. The comprehensive support services funded by the Rivera Initiative had not only addressed Emma's academic needs, but had helped her develop confidence and social skills that extended far beyond the classroom. Emma is now thriving in ways we never thought possible, Dr. Walsh wrote. She's participating in student government, tutoring younger students, and talking about her plans for college. The transformation has been so complete that sometimes I have to remind myself of how dark things seemed just 2 years ago. Your initiative didn't just change her academic trajectory. It saved her childhood and gave her back her future. Reading that letter, I realized that the work we were doing had reached a level of impact that transcended individual success stories. We were creating systemic change that would ripple through communities for generations, breaking cycles of educational inequality that had persisted for decades. The recognition came from unexpected sources. Time magazine named me one of their 100 most influential people, citing the Rivera Initiative's revolutionary approach to educational equity. The United Nations invited me to speak at a conference on global education reform. Harvard Business School developed a case study about the initiative that became required reading in their nonprofit management program. But the recognition that meant the most came from a group I had never expected to hear from. My former classmates from Millbrook High. 20 years after graduation, they organized a reunion that was really an excuse to honor my contributions to education. The invitation came with a personal note from the organizing committee acknowledging that they had failed to recognize my potential in high school and expressing gratitude for the positive impact I had made despite their earlier treatment. I almost declined the invitation. The prospect of returning to Millbrook yet again, of facing the same people who had made my teenage years miserable, seemed unnecessary and potentially painful. But Sarah Kim, still my closest friend, and now serving on the Rivera Foundation board, convinced me that attending would provide closure not just for me but for my former classmates, who were genuinely seeking to make amends. The reunion was held at the Alexandra Rivera Center for Excellence, in the same gymnasium where I had once hidden during lunch to avoid the cafeteria harassment. Walking into that space as the guest of honor, surrounded by former classmates who now treated me with respect and admiration, felt like the completion of a circle that had begun with humiliation and exclusion. Jessica Morrison Phillips approached me early in the evening, her manner nervous but sincere. 20 years had changed her dramatically, and not just physically. The cruel confidence that had defined her teenage persona had been replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. "Alexandra," she said, her voice soft and uncertain, "I've been wanting to have this conversation for years. I need you to know how sorry I am for the way I treated you in high school. I was a terrible person back then. Insecure and cruel. And I took out my own problems on you in ways that were inexcusable." Her apology was more complete and honest than I had expected, acknowledging specific incidents and accepting responsibility without making excuses. She talked about her own struggles with perfectionism and family pressure, not to justify her behavior but to explain the insecurity that had driven her cruelty. Most importantly, she expressed genuine admiration for what I had accomplished. and the positive impact I was having on young people across the state. "What you're doing with the education initiative is incredible," she continued. "My daughter starts high school next year, and knowing that she'll grow up in a world where programs like yours exist gives me hope that she'll be kinder and more compassionate than I was at her age." I accepted her apology graciously, recognizing the courage it had taken for her to confront her past behavior so directly. More than that, I appreciated her acknowledgement that the bullying had been about her own insecurities rather than any failing on my part. It was validation I hadn't realized I still needed. The evening continued with presentations about the impact of the Rivera Initiative, testimonials from teachers and students who had benefited from the programs, and recognition of other alumni who were making positive contributions to their communities. But the moment that touched me most deeply came when the current student body president, a senior named David Chen, who attended school at the center that bore my name, presented me with a handmade book containing letters from hundreds of students whose lives had been changed by Rivera Initiative programs. Each letter was unique, but they shared common themes of gratitude, inspiration, and determination to pay forward the opportunities they had received. Reading those messages from young people I had never met, students who saw me as proof that their current struggles were temporary and their futures were bright, I understood that my work had achieved something beyond educational reform or personal vindication. I had become a symbol of possibility for young people who needed to believe that their circumstances could change, that their voices mattered, that their dreams were achievable. The scared girl who had once eaten lunch alone in the library had grown into a woman whose story was giving hope to thousands of students facing similar challenges. As the reunion wound down and I prepared to leave Millbrook for what felt like a final farewell, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me full circle. The place that had once been a source of pain and humiliation had become the launching point for work that was transforming lives across the state and inspiring similar initiatives around the country. Standing in the parking lot where I had once waited alone for my mother to pick me up, usually the last student remaining because she worked late shifts, I looked up at the building that now bore my name and marveled at the transformations that were possible when pain was channeled into purpose, when individual success was leveraged for collective good. The girl they had called a nobody had become somebody not through revenge or resentment, but through resilience, channeled into service. Every student who would benefit from Rivera Initiative programs, every teacher who received support to do their job more effectively, every family whose child found hope and opportunity in schools that had once been sources of despair, carried forward a legacy that extended far beyond any single person's journey from victim to victor. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus Williams, now serving as a mentor coordinator for the Rivera Initiative. "Saw the coverage of your reunion speech online," he wrote. 20 years ago, they voted you most likely to fail. Tonight, you proved you're most likely to change the world. Thank you for showing all of us what's possible." His message encapsulated everything I had learned about the power of transformation, about the difference between temporary setbacks and permanent defeats, about the choice to build rather than destroy. The vote that had once been intended to humiliate and dismiss had become a prophecy in reverse, a reminder that other people's limited vision of our potential says more about them than about us. As I drove away from Millbrook under a canopy of stars, I thought about all the students who were sleeping in homes across the state, young people whose lives would be different because of choices I had made, because of pain I had transformed into purpose. Some of them were probably lying awake worrying about bullies, about fitting in, about whether they were smart enough or good enough or worthy enough to succeed. I wanted them to know what I had learned through years of struggle and transformation. that their current circumstances were not their permanent destiny, but the very experiences causing them pain today might become sources of strength tomorrow, that failure was only permanent for those who chose to stop trying. The girl they had called a nobody had learned to see herself as somebody, and in doing so had created pathways for thousands of other young people to make the same transformation. That, I realized, was the real victory, the lasting triumph that no amount of money or recognition could match. The legacy wasn't in the buildings that bore my name or the programs that carried my foundation's logo. It was in the lives that were changed, the dreams that were preserved, the potential that was unlocked when young people learned to believe in themselves. And every day, in schools across the state and beyond, that legacy continued to grow.